Welcome to our next discipleship class. Over the next two classes, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different, which I've really never done, and that is I'm going to actually answer somebody's post. I'm going to give a response to a post that was put up by an atheist that has responded on my YouTube channel, and I will be answering 10 reasons why that atheist claims there is a lack of sufficient evidence for God's existence. So, with that start, this will take part one and part two just because of the length, the list, and to give an adequate response. But let's jump in, and then we'll see where we go with this. So, this is the outline, very simple. I want to talk about the post itself, the post, and then the 10 facts or reasons that are listed in the post for why this person feels there is insufficient evidence for the existence of God or any gods. And I will give a theistic response to that list of 10, and then finally a conclusion. So pretty simple and straightforward, but I want to do justice to it. So in the post, look, I received this post to a few of my videos in the series. I did a rather lengthy series on what is atheism, a Christian response. And the goal behind that was to actually give answers instead of just theoretical answers for things that people might ask. These were things on the atheist.org website that were either speaking in the realm of ethics and presenting things really from a worldview that I believe is not possible unless it is imported from a theistic worldview. But be that as it may, as I get into answering the criticisms against the Bible, I had somebody post something that that they presented themselves as an atheist. Now, I get posts. This person's posts were friendly and mature, which I appreciate because sometimes they are not by people. One post in particular was detailed and lengthy, which is the one that I'm going to respond to. And I asked if I could answer in a presentation because trying to answer on a post is just difficult. It's like trying to debate texting. You lose context, you lose verbal inflection. You think things are being said for one reason and it's really another. So I just felt it better to be able to do this in response. And obviously it would present to atheists what the counter-argument was, but also to Christians to understand why atheists, why they don't want to believe in God, which I think, is important. The condition was, in doing this presentation, that I present the list of facts fairly before responding to them or offering criticism, and I happily agreed to do that. I would not want to be misrepresented, so I want to try to at least give what would be the perspective of a person that was an atheist. So we'll go through that next. So here's the post. This is how it started. Hello, I'm an atheist. I define atheism as, and I added the colors for emphasis, as suspending acknowledgement of the existence of gods until sufficient evidence can be presented. My position is that I have no good reason to acknowledge the existence of gods. And here is the evidence as to why I currently hold to such a position. And so now we have the list, and there's 10 reasons. Number one, I personally have never observed a God. Well, that's a valid reason, I guess. If you have never seen a God, then why would you believe in a God? Why would you feel it was necessary to acknowledge the existence of someone you have never seen? I understand that, and that is the perspective that people take. Number two, which is very similar, I have never encountered a person who has claimed to have observed a God. So not only this person is saying I have never, but I don't know anybody else that has. So if I've never seen a God, nobody else that I know has ever seen a God, why would I be in a position to acknowledge a God's existence? And that is a reasonably valid position to take, right? In and of itself, of course. I know of no accounts of persons, number 3, claiming to have observed a God that were willing or able to demonstrate or verify their observation for authenticity, accuracy, or validity. So now I'm assuming that this is when this person says I don't know of any accounts. I don't know if that's anybody like in history or just people that they know, but either way, whatever they have knowledge of, they do not feel that somebody was either willing or able, key point, to demonstrate or verify their observation. And even if somebody was presenting a case for an observation, at least in this person's experience, they don't feel that it could be authenticated or that it was accurate or that there was validity to it, which is why they don't feel compelled to acknowledge God's existence, any God. Number 4, I have never been presented a valid logical argument which also employed sound premises or premises that lead deductively to a conclusion that a God exists. So they feel as though nothing has been presented to them aside from experiential evidence, anything reasonably through logic and a logical argument that was valid enough for them to say, you know what, you're right, I guess I have to acknowledge that God exists. Number 5, of the 46 logical syllogisms, and quite frankly, I don't know what all 46 are, I have encountered arguing for the existence of a God or gods, I have found all to contain multiple fallacious or unsubstantiated premises. So, and again, this is similar to number 4. There's not anything that has been logically presented in syllogisms, major premise, minor premise, conclusion that that has been valid enough for this person to say, you know what, that's a sound argument, and I feel that I need to acknowledge the existence of God. Now, whatever has been presented in these 46 logical syllogisms have obviously had enough unsubstantiated positions that they were founded on, or they were just fallacious arguments to start with. There was nothing really of substance as far as they were concerned to grab onto to acknowledge God's existence. Number 6, I have never observed a phenomenon in which the existence of a God was a necessary antecedent for the known or probable explanation for the causation of that phenomenon. So they've never seen anything happen, apparently in nature and the natural world and everything else, that would require God as the cause for what they observe in whatever phenomenon they're talking about. And I think that would probably be pretty much everything that they can observe. So there is nothing in their view that effectively saying, well, I don't see anything that exists that requires God being the cause of that existence. I think that would be relatively fair to bottom line that. Number 7, several proposed and generally accepted explanations for observable phenomena that were previously based on the agency of a God or gods have subsequently been replaced with rational, natural explanations, each substantiated with evidence that excluded the agency of a god or gods. I have never encountered vice versa. In other words, it's never really worked the other way. So in a sense, I guess an example of that, a simple example would be, I don't know, people used to think that, God was causing the lightning and the thunder and they were afraid. And as we've moved along, scientifically, we've discovered the reason for thunder and lightning. So it's, not only can it be anticipated, but it's understood exactly what is happening to cause the lightning and also cause the sound of the thunder. So where things might have been believed to be caused by a god or gods in the past, and certainly there's a number of phenomenon that people used to believe, especially the ancients, that it was God doing this and God doing that, and God was, unfortunately, because of either a lack of knowledge or a misunderstanding of things, God was believed to be the cause of many things. Unfortunately, sometimes people make him the cause of things today that he has really nothing to do by way of causing, but that's a different story. And so again, this seventh reason is pretty clearly and stated and well defined, I think. Number 8, I have never experienced the presence of a God through intercession of angels, divine revelation, the miraculous act of divinity, or any occurrence of a supernatural event. So, I guess, again, this is a position where a person is saying, look, I've never had any of these experiences that people talk about. Some people talk about, I had this angel come to me, or I see this as divine revelation, or this miraculous act was obviously done by God, and this I see as supernatural, in other words, beyond the natural laws. So I've never had that experienced at all. And again, if a person has never had those as an experience, then certainly they can easily conclude that, why would I be forced or compelled to believe in a God where other people are using many of these reasons to say that God exists? Well, I haven't had the experience, so why should I just say that God exists because they do? Which, again, is obviously the reason why they're maintaining their atheism. Number 9, every phenomenon that I have ever observed has merged from necessary and sufficient antecedents over time without exception. In other words, I have never observed a phenomenon, entity, process, object, event, process is listed again, substance, system, or being that was created ex nihilo, that is from nothing, that is instantaneously came into existence by the solitary volition of a deity. So this person feels that obviously they've never seen anything in any way connected to anything that exists that would basically require God. No phenomenon, no object, no process, nothing. Everything, I'm guessing now, I don't want to misrepresent, but I assume what they're saying is, look, no matter how you look at it and how you slice this onion, I don't see anything that requires anything more than natural law. I think that would be one way to bottom line it, though I don't want to shortchange it. And finally, number 10, all claims of a supernatural or divine nature that I have encountered have either been refuted to my satisfaction, obviously they would have to be, right, or do not present as falsifiable. In other words, if you have if a person develops a position where it's like, well, how am I going to falsify that? That's either based on your experience, your claim, or whatever. In other words, in science and even in observation, we need to be able to reasonably falsify certain claims. But if you if a person claims, well, that, hey, I saw this or whatever, well, there's not always a way to falsify that. Being able to falsify something also gives us the opportunity to validate it. So we don't want to just take on the perspective or present something that is unreasonable. This person obviously, all the claims that they have been presented have either been refuted or they present as, they do not present as falsifiable, so they can't actually be validated as real claims. Effectively, I believe, is what's being said. Trying to be fair here. The post continues, and it basically finishes off, all these facts lead me to the only rational conclusion that concurs with the realities I have been presented, and that is the fact that there is no good reason for me to acknowledge the existence of a God. I have heard often that atheism is the denial of the Abrahamic God, that would be the God in the Bible, and I guess secondarily maybe the Quran, because Arabs work their genealogy and Muslims do back to Abraham. But denial is the active rejection of a substantiated fact once credible evidence has been presented. In other words, how do you deny a God that you don't believe actually exists in the first place is the point. Atheism is simply withholding such acknowledgement until sufficient credible evidence is introduced. It is natural, rational, and prudent to be skeptical of unsubstantiated claims, especially extraordinary ones. And that is the end of the post. I think it was well organized. It was thoughtful. I appreciate it. Obviously, I don't agree with it because I'm not an atheist at this point in my life, but I appreciate the thought and the effort that was put into it. And so I will respond as follows. The response. So the first three in the list, I personally have never observed a God, never encountered a person who has, and I don't know of any accounts of anybody who has or was able to validate that experience or whatever. Response. Number one, though this list is factual evidence in relation to the experience of this particular atheist, atheism does not itself have any objective verification for authenticity, accuracy, or validity. To maintain an atheistic position, in addition, each point is subjective. Now, obviously, if you're saying, I've never really observed this, well, obviously that is by a person's own experience, and again, difficult to falsify, but in contrast to a subjective experience, consciousness, energy, value, judgments, even wind are unobservable, yet they exist. Now, the results of their existence is known through their effects, working effect to cause, that providing necessary evidence. In other words, obviously I know there's wind. I can't see the wind. I feel the wind. I know the wind is there, but that's because it can be measured and everything else. So I know the wind by its effects. I know energy by its effects. Nobody actually knows what energy is. They use it. They measure it. Value judgments. My own consciousness, everybody else's. Those are things that you can't see, but you know them by their effects. So we need to be able to turn this around and also say, well, does atheism have anything that authenticates or validates its position? Now, I understand that the position of many atheists today is that, well, it's like not a position. It's just like, it's nothing until you need to believe in a God. But I think that is illogical, and I'll get into that a little later in the presentation. Under number 1A, it is an extraordinary claim of the atheistic worldview that the universe, life, consciousness, laws of logic, value judgments, design and nature, the unique fine-tuning of the universe, and universal morality all exist without the existence of a theistic God. So these will be explored as we go further through the presentation, but I think it's an extraordinary claim, as it was listed in number 10 anyways, to see the effects of all these and yet at the same time say they just kind of happened, or one natural law somehow led to their development. We got to remember laws have to come from somebody. They don't come from a thing. And when you have all these natural laws that we have not created but discovered, tells us that nature's goal-directed. There's a lot of things that all these laws that we find in physics to be unanswered unless they are made by somebody. Okay? The laws don't just accidentally arise from nothing or from just matter itself. B, to claim any of the above mentioned in that list of darker yellow up there, to claim any of them exist within the materialistic worldview is not natural, rational, and prudent, to quote this person's words. Thus, we should be skeptical of unsubstantiated claims, especially extraordinary ones, like atheism. I think that it is more reasonable to be skeptical against atheism because atheism cannot account, it has no basis to account for all these, the existence of all these non-physical qualities and these things that exist, such as even life itself and consciousness, laws of logic that we're using now, the ability to communicate all this. This doesn't come from rocks. This doesn't come from nothing. I think we need to be careful that we don't use what I call the natural selection of the gaps. It's a dangerous place to be because Christians oftentimes, when they don't have an answer for something, and they say, well, God did it. Well, that's the God of the gaps argument. I don't know how it happened, so God did it, and I just keep filling in wherever I have no knowledge. And I understand the problem with that argument. But, very easily, atheism looks to evolution and natural selection as kind of the miracle worker, really, for bringing, matter to non-matter and developing life from non-life and just these extraordinary claims that are really unproven, and they get into more of a story than actual evidence. There is no actual evidence for any of that. It is all observing pieces and then deciding how those pieces fit together without actually observing or seeing one thing arise from another, which we can certainly get into, but let's move along. C, the important point here is that atheism is not the natural, rational, and foundational worldview position that needs to be unseated as if opposing views are abnormal or unusual. For the atheistic worldview itself is extraordinary, like we were just talking. It assumes what it's trying to prove. In other words, atheism is true because it's natural. Now, that's not logical. I don't believe there's any amount of logic that works there. For me to say, well, I'm an atheist because it's not acknowledging the existence of a God. But wait a minute, we need to back up and say, first of all, how did all this come to be and everything else? And then to say, well, it's just all natural processes. Well, we have to have evidence for that. We have to have evidence beyond kind of just so stories and wishful thinking. We have to have actual, credible evidence that one thing arose from either something that didn't exist or something else that existed, without some of the old, really poor attempts at evolutionists to try to use natural selection of the gaps, like I call it. And so how does this kind of circular reasoning work, right, which I just mentioned? So how do you know atheism is true? Well, it's natural, it's rational, it's a rational position, right? This is how it works. Other positions must be proved. That is the assumption. This atheist that made the post, the premise is atheism is the natural position that everybody should have. So anything beyond that needs to be proved to atheism because it's natural and rational to be an atheist. Why is theism wrong? Well, because theism is not rational. It's extraordinary, right? Well, then we go back. Well, how do you know atheism is true? Well, it's the natural, rational position. Unfortunately, this is what we call circular reasoning. It's not really based on anything. It's based on its original premise. It's also called begging the question. You're assuming what you're trying to prove. You assume atheism is true because you are deciding that it is the rational, normal position that everybody should have, without evidence, by the way. And then all of a sudden now, but God exists. He's the one that created. Oh, no. That, nobody can get me to that place because, atheism has to be unseated. Well, I beg to differ. I don't think that atheism within its own worldview, which has nothing beyond the material world, can find any valid reasons for the list of things that I had put up there, just that few, as to why or how they ever came to be, never mind the fact that they do exist and we use them. Number two, in the continued response, there are historic people that claim to have had, and this is we're getting back to the subjective aspect, that have claimed to have had an experience with God and could in fact provide verification by miraculous acts of God, working effect to cause, since by necessity God must be beyond the physical time, space, matter universe. God must be known by his acts. God is necessary and unique. In other words, if God is beyond the time, space, matter universe, if he is necessarily that, then how am I going to know that he exists other than philosophically? In other words, I would have to know that some being has created everything and put it there, because there's no logical reason for it to just arise by itself from nothing. We can develop a ton of different theories on that and talk about it. It's validating them, and to use the atheists' word, they need to be able to be falsified. So miracles are important. As I mentioned here, the miraculous acts of God. There are people in history that have utilized these miraculous acts as validation. God actually has to validate that he was speaking. Why miracles? Well, how does God communicate to man? He didn't do a poll to see what people desired as a means of revelation. God didn't check it out with everybody and say, okay, will everybody be happy with this? He didn't do that. He didn't ask people what they expected him to do. He didn't say, okay, well, what would you like me to do? He wasn't responding to their whims and wishes. He doesn't show himself to taunting atheists. How many times I've heard the atheists say, well, if God is there, why didn't he just stick his head out in the clouds? Are you there, God? Well, he's not answering, so why would I believe that he's there? He doesn't overpower with face-to-face interaction. Now look, God could overwhelm people. He could stick his face right in their face, if you will, and they would have no choice but to believe. But that doesn't mean that they love and appreciate him for who he is. So the issue is that God is looking for a relationship, and that is not the way to do it by basically forcing and imposing yourself on somebody. That's not why he created us. Creating us with free will means that it's no different than, when I met the girl that I ended up eventually marrying. I loved her. I wanted to show my love to her, and so, we developed a relationship. To do it the other way, to kind of impose myself and force and everything else, we call that stalking. We don't do that. So free will provides us the opportunity for setting our own value as to who we want to spend our life with. And those are choices that we make. We assign values to different things. That's not something that is designed in DNA. That is beyond the material person. And that's why there is no value molecule. There's no, value part of your brain. It's like your consciousness. Now, God did choose a more subtle means to communicate to people so that they would believe. He generally reveals his existence in nature. We can look at nature, we can see its design and complexity, contrary to what Richard Dawkins and Francis Crick want to tell us, that we should, every time we look at nature, we should say it's not designed, there's no design. Well, basically, what they're saying is you need to deny all your senses other than what I tell you. So I don't know how Francis Crick and Richard Dawkins became the answer people and elevated to this place of authority where I can't look at nature and discover for myself unless I look through the lens of their viewpoints. I think that we need to get away from that's dangerous thinking. So anyways, God reveals himself and his existence generally in nature because anybody can look out there and realize, well, this didn't just happen by accident through a random process over time. He specifically revealed his words by a book. Written communication can be accepted or rejected, right? And that's why the written word is important. And written communication can be examined and discussed. In other words, we can use our logic and our reason to work through this process and decide whether we are going to accept it or not. How would we know what book? Good question. Books, letters, right? They can be verified by official seals. In other words, there has to be some indication of who it came from. Books can have indications that authenticate them. There are different writings, ancient writings, where they have analyzed them and based on, word usage, sentence structure, all this other stuff, dating the manuscripts and all, they can determine, perhaps who had written them. Artists are known by their brushstrokes. I mean, look at the millions of dollars that they spend on, or some of these, Van Goghs and all that stuff. They're priceless. So, but they have to be validated. Is this an original Van Gogh? And so they have experts analyze the brushstrokes to, is it really his? Because they have a signature to them. We do this with everything. I mean, that's how they catch criminals. So, this is nothing new, but we need to exercise this kind of reason and logic when we're dealing with books. Handwriting analysis traces, verifies authors. So, look, they use this in criminal investigations and everything else. So, handwriting analysis can tell us much about who the person is that actually did it. Fingerprints specifically identify individuals, right? So we know that for sure. Everybody's fingerprints are individual to the person. What is the verifiable seal of authentication for God's book and messengers? They are miracles. Why? Because only God can perform them as his fingerprints. That's God's fingerprints for how we know what he's saying and doing. Miracles are something only God can use willfully. He can do that when he wants. Through miracles, God could tell the world which book or which person speaks for him. And I think that's a reasonable conclusion, and I think it's been a validated one as well. Miracles can confirm a message from God. Which theistic God demonstrates his message by miracles today? Obviously, we're dealing in the realm of a theistic God, atheistic God, not polytheism, not pantheism, where everything is God. None of those actually even make logical sense. Having finite gods or limited gods, and all the panentheism, all these different kind of versions of God that people come up with, they are not even logically consistent with the people that are devising those forms of religious worship and everything else. But when we really boil it down, logically, the only God or being possible is one that is separate from creation, because he is not what he created. He can't be what he created. It has to be beyond the material universe, space, time, and matter. The only ones that fit that category, at least by definition within the existing religions in the world, is Islam. But Islam believes in one God, but they have no eyewitnesses to miracles. And that's important, because Muhammad was asked to do miracles and refused. He said, I don't do miracles. That's not what I do. Islam first attributed miracles to Muhammad over 200 years after his death to answer Christianity. Christianity had the validation of miracles that was substantiated not only from the first century originally, but even passed on. And Islam found it very difficult to argue against Christianity because it had no validation other than a claim that the Quran was, from God. It was only a claim. In other words, there was no miraculous accompaniment to validate that it was coming from anywhere other than just Muhammad's thinking. Judaism today shows no miracles today since the advent of Christianity. Now, originally within Judaism, right, the Old Testament, Moses, the prophets, plenty of miracles validating who they were and that God was speaking through them. But that transferred to Christianity through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So Christianity is the only answer to miracles today. It is the only belief, religion, whatever you want to call it, in the world that has been validated through the miraculous, though not necessarily exactly like the original apostles, where it was a little bit unique at the beginning. But there are still miracles today that we see within Christian circles as God is working not only through missionaries, but even in churches from time to time. So this is really, out of the three, Christianity is the only one that actually answers the question today of miracles. Why miracles? God uses miracles as his fingerprints, like we said. He did miracles through people in the Bible. Moses had a lot of miracles that were done that were put down, evaluated, and also because he wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, there was he put error correction in there, Deuteronomy 13 and other places, Deuteronomy 18. In other words, everything from the rest of the Bible is really based on the first 5 books. The prophets developed the law in the Old Testament and then speak to anticipate the New Testament. The New Testament comes, the Old Testament ends, New Testament is in Christ's blood, it's a whole new covenant, and then that's where we're at today. being validated by the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So prophets in the Old Testament after Moses spoke, and again, ones like Elijah and Elisha, I mean, all the prophets, many of them had accompanying miracles and prophetic messages that were also evidence that God was speaking through them. So, because if they, again, from Deuteronomy 13, any prophet or dreamer of dreams that got up and said something that wasn't true, that it was a death sentence. They would be stoned for it. So, because it would be an idolatry. So, and then Jesus and the apostles in the New Testament, we saw that in a sense almost like a transfer of power. And then the miracle confirms the message and the messenger. So that's how we know. In other words, when the apostles went out and preached the gospel, they were accompanied by many miracles, and that validated their message. God was working among them. The sign substantiates the sermon. So God gave them signs to validate to the people that God was speaking through them, very similar to the Old Testament when the prophets had that. Because miracles are evidence. Isaiah 44, God is providing reasons. Isaiah 44 is a great chapter, by the way. But God is providing reasons why Israel should listen to him and not to the dead idols. In other words, they were getting into idolatry. They were starting to worship these foolish pagan idols that surrounded them in the nations that were there. And God said in Isaiah 44 that there's a reason why you should listen to me and not go to these idols. The evidence he offers is the fingerprints of his miraculous power. In Isaiah 44:7, he says, "And who can proclaim," talking about the future, "as I do?" Well, nobody can, because nobody else can see the future. Nobody else is outside of time to be able to see all of time. In Isaiah 44:26, he says, "Who confirms the word of his servant and performs the counsel of his messengers?" That's what he does. He confirms the word of his servant and performs the counsel of his messengers because he's speaking through his messengers, and then in speaking through them, he actually does what they claim that God had told them. If God had not told them and it doesn't happen, well, they got stoned. But this is how God validated himself speaking, not only through Isaiah, but through other prophets. God confirms his servant by bringing his word to pass, and the miracle confirms his messengers. Very, very simple concept. Now, miracles are public. In the New Testament, miracles publicly mark God's messengers to confirm their message. That's how they would know who the Messiah was. I mean, they had all these Old Testament prophecies regarding who the Messiah was, so he could be recognized. There were many indications previously given that somebody would have had to fulfill, and that would have marked who they were. In Hebrews 2, verse 4, it says that the writer said, "God also bearing witness both with signs and wonders, with various miracles." That's how God bore witness that he was speaking through them, and gifts of the Holy Spirit according to his own will. This wasn't by the will of the people performing the signs and wonders. God did that to validate them. Paul indicated it was one of the marks of an apostle. In 2 Corinthians 12:12, he says, "Truly, the signs of an apostle were accomplished among you with all perseverance in signs and wonders and mighty deeds." The word is miracles, the Greek word. Peter said in Acts 2:22 that Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested by God to you, how? By miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did through him in your midst. You were witnesses. This was public. This wasn't hidden. Everybody saw what he was doing. It's a wonder that they didn't all just believe. But God gives people free choice. Miracles are prophetic, right? When John the Baptist was imprisoned by Herod, John sent two of his disciples to ask Jesus about his works, because John assumed, now there's prophetically regarding the Messiah, he was also supposed to rule on David's throne and deliver Israel. from all the surrounding nations, and they were under the yoke of Rome at that point. So John the Baptist was trying to make sense of this. He was in prison by Herod, and he sent his disciples to Jesus and said, "Hey, like, is there something I'm missing? Did I make a mistake? Like, make sure that this is the guy." So in response, in Matthew 11:4 and 5, it says, Jesus answered the disciples of John that he had sent to ask, and said to them, Go and tell John the things which you hear and see. The blind see, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor of the gospel preached to them. These are the indications that I am the Messiah. That's what Jesus is saying. In other words, John, you need to be satisfied with what was written, because I'm fulfilling what was written. Nothing else is valid. What does the Scripture say? Which is why it is so important that we understand the Bible in its context and the fact that it is the Word of God. When the Jews challenged Jesus to substantiate him being the Messiah, the Jews being the leadership, he pointed them to his miracles because they fulfilled the Scriptures of the Messiah. In John 10:25, it said, Jesus answered them, I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness of me. The miracles are validation for who I am. You can't really make it any more simple than that. Miracles are important because they validate the messenger and the message. And they have a purpose. Miracles do. In the Bible, miracles have a specific purpose. They are carefully displayed as a work of God to glorify him and not the miracle worker, other than Jesus Christ, obviously, because he was God in human flesh. So he was being glorified as well as the Father. Actually, he was being glorified by glorifying the Father. So they substantiate the message of the messengers as being from God and not man, so the man can't take the credit for it. They are all pointing really back to God. They are supernatural and not supernormal. They are beyond the natural laws and the natural, beyond nature, the way we understand how it functions. Not supernormal, not beyond what is normal for a spiritual entity, a demonic being. So demons act outside what is normal to us, but not to them. So it is beyond what's normal to us, but not to them. In other words, demons can't create life. Only God can. So even with Pharaoh, when they got to the lice, they said to Pharaoh, hey, we could duplicate some things as we're going along here, but, these Moses here is, they're creating life from no life. This is the finger of God. They came to some wisdom there anyways. Miracles fulfill predictions made in the Bible. And miracles are done for the benefit of others as God is glorified in the performing of them. So they're not just magic tricks that people do or whatever. They are there to validate what God is doing and that it is God that is actually involved in doing it. Look, the greatest miracle, since the greatest miracle has already occurred, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, why can't other miracles occur? Obviously, if God could make the universe, everything else is a piece of cake, right? Well, let's look at quickly the miracle of the resurrection. Jesus predicted his own resurrection after 3 days, specifically 3 days. Jesus answered and said to them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then the Jews said, it has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days? And then John gives us his comment. He says, but he was speaking of the temple of his body. So Jesus was trying to explain to them, look, you kill me, I'm coming back in 3 days. But he was speaking of the temple of his body and not of the temple in Jerusalem. All right.
We all know we're going to die, eventually. But what happens after we die? Maybe at death, you simply cease to exist. Your body turns to dust, and, well, that's it. Game over. Or maybe something does happen after you die. What if life somehow continues? Maybe you're reborn as someone or something else. Then you die, then you're reborn, then you die, and so on, until you're finally enlightened and become one with the universe. Or perhaps you become a shadowy ghost, wandering in the underworld. Or maybe you're judged on how good you've been. If you've done more good than bad, you win. Here's the problem. If you're alive, there's no way to know what it's like after death. Unless someone dies, then comes back to life and tells us about it. According to his followers, that's precisely what Jesus did. If this claim is true, then he can provide us with a clear picture of what lies ahead. Jesus told us there is a heaven, but also a hell. Your response matters because your view of the next life affects how you live this life and whether you'll be prepared for what lies ahead. None of us knows when it'll be our turn. But notice, each of these after-death scenarios contradicts the others. If one is correct, the others aren't. One option is unique. Jesus Christ is the only person who actually conquered death. And Christ offers his life to you, giving you a new life that can begin now and continue after death in heaven. A life that doesn't depend on your goodness, but on his. Are you ready for death? You can be.
So I like that little cartoon video. I think they do a good job. And so let's move on. Under number 2, we move on to historical documents. So we're talking about historical people, talking about miraculous acts of God for validation. And there is historically verifiable documents in antiquity of both the Old Testament prophets, New Testament apostles and prophets. The Jews accepted the messengers or the messages of prophets when accompanied by miracles which substantiated their sermons. So they accepted it because God validated it, and that's important because that's what we've been just talking about. The New Testament validates the Old Testament. So we have the validation in the Old Testament, the New Testament also, but then the New Testament validates the entire Old Testament. Specific prophecies and their fulfillment is undeniable evidence of transcendent knowledge of the future. Being capable of this would need to be, number one, would need to transcend time, right? No one in the time-space continuum has this kind of knowledge. Nobody actually knows what the future is going to be. Nobody can do it the way God did it. God did it a number of times in the Old Testament, in the 40s chapters of Isaiah, like I was just mentioning out of 44. God many times said that, look, I'm telling you this before it happens so that when it happens, you'll believe. He based it on evidence, not on wishful thinking. Faith is trust, but faith is not acting or in existence alone. We don't just kind of have faith. You have to have faith in an object, and faith is only as good as the object of your faith. I think sometimes we're too enamored with Hollywood's view of what faith is, which is blind and just kind of more wishful thinking. This being would need to control history. Predictions reveal foreknowledge and foreordination. So foreknowledge would be, I know what's going to happen ahead of time, so I'm telling you. Foreordination would be, in this instance, I'm going to make this happen. So So it's not just, at times it's a passive information where it's like, well, this is what's going to occur. That's why I'm telling you. And other times it's like, well, this is what's going to occur because I'm telling you I'm going to do that. And that would be towards foreordination. They would need to communicate their existence. This being would have to communicate his existence. That's general revelation in nature. We talked about that. David said in Psalm 119, the heavens declare the glory of God, the firmament, the atmosphere, shows his handiwork, right, and all the design and detail and everything. Day into day it utters speech, night into night it shows knowledge. There's no speech nor language, their voice is not heard, but their word goes out to the world and their line to the end of the earth. So, everybody in the world can look at creation, whether it's in the stellar heavens, or whether in the atmosphere with all the detail in creation or under the water. I'm a scuba diver. I love it. But that stuff, there's just no way. You'd have to deny your own senses to think that all that stuff came from simply natural selection. And this being would need to communicate his message, right? Not only his existence, that he's there to make everything, but his message. And that's what we're dealing with, this special revelation in the Bible. All right, so in current day experience, Craig Keener published a 2-volume set on miracles that are based on the experience of individuals throughout multiple cultures. This is an example of the miraculous that aligns with the life experience of people who seek the God of the Bible for miraculous help. So if anybody's interested, this is a huge 2-volume set, a lot of reading, but this is the current day experiences that people have with miracles. Number 4, the existence of the universe itself. Let's think about that. Effect to cause is evidence of a necessary being capable of creating all that exists in time and space. Look, let's be realistic. Stories of the multiverse, oscillating universe, quantum energy, redefined as nothing, and on and on. They don't provide the necessary characteristics for the universe, for everything that we have. Design, non-material aspects of life on Earth and everything else, it just doesn't do it. Nowhere has it been observed. We're talking about this atheist is saying what he observed, or she, whoever it is. Nowhere has it been observed that energy or matter creates life, consciousness, logic. A theistic worldview is required to even have a rational discussion of these issues. In order for us to be doing this, to be trafficking in these thoughts and these concepts, the logic, the reasoning back and forth, they're all non-tangible. This is not the material world. This is beyond. Our ability to do that, though our mind uses our brains, our mind is not our brains. It is beyond that, and it is certainly obvious, I believe, to the casual observer. So let's move on in the list. Now, I think we can put 4 through 6 together. I've never been presented a valid logical argument, which also employed sound premises that lead deductively to a conclusion that a God exists. Of the 46 syllogisms I've encountered arguing for the existence of a God or gods, I have found all to contain multiple fallacious or unsubstantiated premises. And number 6, I have never observed a phenomenon in which the existence of a God was a necessary antecedent for the known or probable explanation of the causation of that phenomenon. In response, number 1, the logical argument requires only one syllogism as I understand it, and it includes by necessity the antecedent in question, so we can answer these kind of combined. The argument from causality, we've been talking about it. Premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. I don't think you can really deny that. I think it's undeniable. Nothing in our experience, nothing in anybody's experience really is going to falsify that. Premise number 2, The universe began to exist, philosophically answered by time, right? Scientifically answered by the second law of thermodynamics, to pick one. So the philosophical evidence, the universe is not eternal. Time is not eternal, obviously. Can't have eternal time. Time is inseparable from matter. We know that they all coexist. Physical evidence, the universe is not eternal. Matter and space are physical. They exist, obviously. The second law of thermodynamics acts on matter over time. So, the philosophical evidence. If we had a timeline going back from the present day today, we go back to yesterday, the day before yesterday, right, last week. Well, you can't have an eternal past, otherwise you would never have come to the present day. You can't have an eternal number of days. That's not possible. You have to have a limited number of finite days, which means the universe must have had a beginning. We are arguing from effect back to cause. And I think we need to recognize the simplicity of that argument, right? If the past were infinite, today would never have arrived. So if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. Very simple, right? The evidence leaves us with the following two options. No one created something out of nothing, which is the atheist view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. And it has to be either or, right? It can't be both. Which view do you think is more reasonable, right? So the physical evidence, the second law of thermodynamics, the universe is running down. It is running out of energy or usable energy. So again, you can't have an eternal amount of that. That is not how we understand cause and effect at all.
God is the best explanation of the origin of the universe. We have pretty strong evidence that the universe is not eternal in the past, but had an absolute beginning a finite time ago. In 2003, Arvin Bord, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin were able to prove that any universe which has on average been in a state of cosmic expansion cannot be infinite in the past, but must have a past space-time boundary. What makes their proof so powerful is that it holds regardless of the physical description of the very early universe. Because we don't yet have a quantum theory of gravity, we can't yet provide a physical description of the first split second of the universe. But the Bord-Guth-Vilenkin theorem is independent of any physical description of that moment. Their theorem implies that the quantum vacuum state, which may have characterized the early universe, cannot be eternal in the past, but must have had an absolute beginning. Even if our universe is just a tiny part of a so-called multiverse composed of many universes, their theorem requires that the multiverse itself must have had an absolute beginning. Of course, highly speculative scenarios such as loop quantum gravity models, string models, even closed time-like curves have been proposed to try to avoid this absolute beginning. These models are fraught with problems, but the bottom line is that none of these models, even if true, succeeds in restoring an eternal past. Last spring, at a conference in Cambridge celebrating the 70th birthday of Stephen Hawking, Vilenkin delivered a paper entitled, "Did the Universe Have a Beginning?" which surveyed current cosmology with respect to that question. He argued, and I quote, "None of these scenarios can actually be past eternal." He concluded, "All the evidence we have says that the universe had a beginning." But then the inevitable question arises. Why did the universe come into being? What brought the universe into existence? There must have been a transcendent cause which brought the universe into being. We can summarize our argument thus far as follows. 1, the universe began to exist. 2, if the universe began to exist, then the universe has a transcendent cause. 3, therefore, the universe has a transcendent cause. By the very nature of the case, that cause must be a transcendent, immaterial being. Now, there are only 2 possible things that could fit that description. Either an abstract object, like a number, or an unembodied mind or consciousness. But abstract objects don't stand in causal relations. The number 7, for example, has no effect on anything. Therefore, the cause of the universe is plausibly an unembodied mind or person. And thus we are brought not merely to a transcendent cause of the universe, but to its personal creator.
Let me turn my mic on. I think Dr. Craig did a great job there. And again, I feel that his presentation, though much longer, you get that off of YouTube, certainly makes the point, and I think that it is much more reasonable than the alternative. So the conclusion would be, from our 2 premises, therefore the universe has a cause. The cause is the original uncaused cause, and the necessary antecedent, which was in question with the list, that cannot be part of the time-space-matter universe that had a beginning. This being is not part of what it made, right? What kind of uncaused cause would be necessary to create the universe and life as we understand it in its complexity, design, and environmental fine-tuning? The necessary characteristics on what we know, right? Obviously, it'd have to be necessary, right? Required to create the universe, the necessary antecedent. Intelligent, nature is goal-directed and displays evidence of design, information, and messaging. All those require intelligence. Powerful, in other words, capable of creating and controlling what is created. Purposeful, design has a purpose. People do not create without having a purpose to make it, I guess, unless you're looking at some of the modern art that's in question. Personal, the existence of the creation reveals a will to create. Only personhood has a will. That makes this being personal. You have to have a will to create to do it. It doesn't just happen. We know this by our own experience and understanding. Transcendent, beyond time, space, and matter. Non-contingent, does not require the universe to exist. In other words, this being existed before the universe, had to be there to make it. Moral, establishes what is right and wrong for intelligent creatures capable of knowing. And again, you get into the moral argument. People understand epistemologically what morality is, but they have no basis for justifying morality unless morality is outside who we are. It transcends us and has its foundation in this being. This being is the foundation of what is right and wrong. It finds in the nature of God what morality is. Engaged, does miracles and intervenes in the world. The first miracle is creation of the universe. From nothing and life, we get everything. We get life from nothing, right? And is unique, does not have an equal. There cannot be 2 infinite, eternal, perfect beings. This eliminates polytheism and pantheism, obviously. So these are the characteristics, or at least some of them, that this being by necessity would need. So this is the end of part 1. I know this went a little bit long. In part 2, we'll cover numbers 7 through 10 on the list. We'll do that next week. And so thank you for watching. And I appreciate your patience, especially with the length. So until next week, may God richly bless you as you continue to study His Word.